So Cole Arthur Riley reflected that when she was little, she wouldn't confess to anything. So she answered instead her father's questions with another question. "Did you kick the ball into the porch light?" he'd asked. "Didn't you tell us not to kick the ball in that direction?" she'd say back. It's a masterful turn, right? Sometimes he'd stare her down until she finally confessed. And sometimes, maybe you recognize this for yourselves, he would just sigh to himself, accept the chasm between them, and still pull her in, close. He knew, and she knew, what she didn't admit to. That rhythm between parent and child can feel so familiar, whether it is in our regular, everyday, going and coming fleshly lives, or if it is our life with God. And Jesus knew this because of his humanity, because he felt what it is to be human to the very depths of himself as he walked across the earth alongside us. He knew that tendency always to try to protect ourselves from pain. You could see it in the exchange that he was offering as people were asking questions about a most recent event with the Galileans, and then a much further back event in the Judeo-Christian memory of the Tower of Siloam. Again, for those of us that have day jobs and maybe aren't digging into biblical context all of the time, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. Basically, these Galileans had been a ragtag group of folks that continued to push the envelope of the occupying force of the Roman Empire. And so these people, many times before, had been martyred or jailed or been made an example of. And this larger group came and took their journey toward the holy city, the holy temple in Jerusalem, as Jesus will in a few weeks' time in our journey together. And they just got a little too close for comfort. And so what happened? These Galileans were killed. Not only killed, but you could see the mention of the fact that they were sacrificed on the altar as a bull or goat or sheep or a dove would be at that time. To us, it sounds awful, but to them it was an offense of the highest order. And so we find these things, both the Galilean story and then the Tower of Siloam, that just continue to be the same kind of big story that was passed down through oral tradition, generation after generation. And it's easy when we are, as I believe these folks among Jesus's crowd were afraid, we point to the biggest thing outside of ourselves for a reason for the pain and insecurity we might be feeling. Again, Jesus knew this, and so he was calling them to a deeper awareness in the midst of their own circumstances. He found himself in the midst of literal death, calling them to be more mindful about the spiritual death that many of them were rooted in right now. I didn't preach on this at the 8:30 service, but it came to my awareness in between services, and I wanted to share it with you. I've been in a class on Wednesday nights. You've seen it put out with Lisa and Karen and others, all teaching about the Enneagram. Now, it's an ancient spiritual practice. It's not some new age fad of personality tests. It is rooted in our faith over many centuries, this practice, this awareness, this body of framing spiritual struggles and delights. And one of the things I've been reminded of is that among every single one of us, every person in this room, everyone that is hearing my voice, wherever you are, we all have a tendency when we feel fear and insecurity and deep pain to compensate in every way that we possibly can, sometimes to the nth degree where we become a shadow of who we know we are. I know I can say for myself, the way that shows up is I'm a performer. It's a great job for that kind of person, right? A performer that whenever we feel fear, particularly of failure, we project every level of strength we possibly can. There are others in our midst that I'm sure when we feel insecurity or weakness, there are times where we lash out in rage and anger as a demonstration of that strength that nobody will question. There are other times when we feel like we are so unprepared for the present moment. We might double down to be the maven, to know every single intricate detail of a system or of a person or of a discipline so that we can display mastery when it counts. Or perhaps we are running from pain itself and are just looking for whatever entertainment or enthusiasm that will help us have a sense of relief. And there are others, right? But Jesus knew that the chasm between our outer appearance, what we offer to the world in these moments, and our inner reality can be much wider than any of us can often see unless we really take the discipline of looking. And so over these past few weeks, we've been looking at our reactions to things and trying to find threads through these ways that you and I might be compensating and trying to project strength in times where we might feel seeming weakness. And even this week, the Examine kind of takes that a step further, where it asks about your threats, it asks about those reactions, but it goes deeper and says, what do you notice about the way that your outer life presents, and what do you feel within? And how do those have meaning and integrity and integration, and how might they be worlds apart? Karen asked the question, where do you see evidence of the fruit of the Spirit? Or where do you see evidence of something else? I think these questions are really important for us to hold in this time and every time. We shared at Fellowship Night a few weeks ago. It's a time where we get together as a church once a month for a meal and a very short time of reflection. It's an intergenerational time of connecting. And there was a moment where we had an apple tree in the front of the room. And the demonstration was that this apple tree, as small as it was growing really tall and high in a way that we would expect of a healthy tree. But it was explained that this tree, though it seems like it's in a place of success and thriving, growing tall, the reality is this particular kind of tree has to be cut halfway, cut much lower than anybody might expect, where the wood is splintered and in fact raw and messy and jagged in some parts. And when you look at it from far away, it's kind of awkward having this flat sense like a tree is already sick and it's just on its last leg. But the reality is that cut, even in its risk, even in its potential to actually kill the tree, is its best opportunity for new life. And especially if the tree is not producing fruit, we find that it's at that messy and jagged place of cutting where the sun can come in and the nutrients that it needs, all of the ways that it needs to be exposed so it might grow differently, those are available to it. And many times we find that it doesn't grow just tall but wide. And that tree begins to produce fruit that is prolific and is bountiful. Much like confession for us, actually being real about those painful places in our own lives, maybe those places where we have projected the trappings of success or strength, but it is not what will yield true life. Much like confession, we need the Son to reach us, to help us grow too. And I don't know about y'all, but my experience of those cuts, those times where perhaps life has done the cutting, or I have made myself available, you have made yourself available for that pruning that goes beyond what we think is necessary. Those cuts are the times that reveal to us maybe the next challenging steps we need to take, or it may reveal to us a grief that needs to be leaned into for our deeper healing before we can step into the good thing. Kate Bowler talks about these experiences, this risk of death, being actually grieving our future self. She says, I used to think that grief was about looking backward. Old men and women saddled with regrets, or young ones pondering the should-haves of their lives. I see now that it is all about eyes squinting through tears into an unbearable future. Now that might sound fraught. It might seem like bad news. It's like, come on, we came for a light laugh and a joke here today. We want to be lifted in this time. I feel that need to, y'all. But at the same time, it is a reminder that even the seeming news that is challenging and hard can be a reminder of what is good. That God shows up for us, not only in the night of grief, but in the day of our thriving. That God reigns on the just and the unjust all the same. There's a sense where, as even we try to point to that thing out there that is the place of where suffering and sin might begin, rather than looking at the 3 and 4 fingers that might be pointing back to us, we might find that God may just open up a whole new reality for us that we desperately, desperately need to heal. Joni Mitchell has a song that really talks about the breakdown that she experienced with some hard times of love making and breaking. It's a song called Both Sides Now, right? You see the sunny side of entering into a relationship that feels like it is life, and then on the other side. And how perhaps even in the making and in the breaking, there is beauty on both sides. She says, I've looked at love from both sides now, from give and take, and still somehow it's love's illusions that I recall, that I really don't know love quite. I really don't know love at all. In that sense, for us, the parable that Jesus offered to the people then and to us now is to remind us that this vine grower, this planter, this garden tender that he talks about is not unscrutinizing, right? So it's not just willy-nilly saying, you know what you need to do, but just don't worry about it. Not a big deal. We'll wait a couple more years. In fact, this love and attention that he is showing is exactly the opposite. It is an exquisite and painful attention when we are not bearing fruit in the way that we thought it might. It is an intentional effort of seeing. It is an active listening and tending over these times, not a passive or uninterested one. I don't know about you, but there are times in my life where I've had a turning and have experienced the confession that felt like it would be my undoing, and it became this awareness that God was just waiting for me to catch up to what God already sees for my life and for yours. Confession, telling the truth, is liberation and integration for us both. And I don't know whether liberation depends on reconciliation with everybody around us, but it definitely depends on reconciling what is within, what is in ourselves. In this life, all we can do is stay whole with an interior unity that allows a fertile ground for God to speak and to tend and to actually work with us. Not spending so much time taking the halves of us in the inner and outer to try to even pull them back together so they look somewhat the same. I think we can only come to a place where we can do that, where we can live a life of integrity, where our inner feeling is actually displayed as our outer life. When we feel weakness or we feel vulnerability, that it is the place where we feel trust enough in the room, whatever room we're in, to say we can offer this and not be broken, that we will offer this, risk it even, and we will not die for the sharing. I know so many of us, it is the limitation, the cut, the even look of our lives being a fraction of what it once was that feels like it is a risk that is too difficult to bear, or one that we can put off toward tomorrow. But a friend of mine shared, and I do believe it, that resurrection doesn't happen without a little death. And we have too many churches and too many of us that really want lasting and transformational change in our lives that aren't willing to risk the discomfort of a little dying in the process. So today, friends, I am speaking into all of our lives that we are living in that year or 2 years of grace, that it is always available to us, and Jesus is speaking that very active commitment to say, I'm going to give you just a little bit more time because I know you need it. And so in that time, we have the invitation to respond to this patient and industrious, ever hopeful God that is found in Jesus incarnated among us. A God who believes in us far more than we ever can fully believe in ourselves, and believes that we can bring forth a harvest of fruit for the feeding of the world. I wonder what that looks like for you today when you pull your inner and outer life together with integrity. I know for me it looks like taking that veneer of strength and performance off and leaning into vulnerability with a community of people that I trust love me. That's the work I have to lean into again and again every day, even when it's hard. And you help me as your pastor do that, inviting me in. I want us all to do the same thing for each other. Wherever we see ourselves overcompensating or protecting or preserving a sense of strength that the world affirms, let's invite each other to go a little deeper, to step forward and closer just a little more, and see what God might do. May we forever believe in the tenacious hope extended to us by a loving God as we offer this space today and always for each other. Amen.